Some may wonder why the Second Council of Nicaea gave such a forceful pronouncement regarding the veneration of holy images. For this council, it was not sufficient to affirm that the devotional use of sacred images is legitimate, but that our participation in this devotion is necessary. And, just like in the other 6 ecumenical councils, these pronouncements were dictated by foundational theological truths, especially regarding the most crucial of them all, Christology. Their purpose always being to preserve the teachings of the holy apostles. In this video, I will attempt to explicate some of these foundational truths while considering the common objections held by many Protestants. Since, for the Protestant mind, Christianity is highly individualistic and the Church invisible, the pronouncements of Nicaea too are not sufficient to demonstrate the apostolicity of the iconic tradition. However, if a biblically grounded explanation for the Council's theology is set forth, there could be a compelling reason to take a closer look at what the Holy Church has always maintained regarding images. In Scripture, few sins are as reviled as idolatry, so much so that the first 2 commandments of the Decalogue are strong prohibitions of it. Over and over, we get warnings against idolatry, indicating that it is a sinful and immoral act. But the question that we must first address is this: what exactly is idolatry? In the answer, we may find why this sin is so stressed upon and how broad are its effects. First, the linguistics. Idolatry, broadly speaking, simply means image worship. This terminology alone can be highly ambiguous if not properly contextualized. Therefore, we must shed some clarity regarding the meaning of worship itself, for it is common for people to understand that worship simply denotes an action that is due to God alone. This is how we moderns typically understand this word, and it is the reason why it is common for traditional leaning churches to delineate a difference between worship and veneration, latria and dulia. Latria will then be a devotion due to God alone, and dulia a reverence due to creatures. But words are simply tools. Their meanings morph over time to suit different needs. And in this case, it has been useful to make these distinctions in order to make the point that one ought not to serve God in the same way that one serves a creature. However, if we scrutinize the scriptures, one will notice that this distinction of latria and dulia is not really there in this technical way. For example, when someone bows in reverence towards a human, the Greek term paraskinesis and the Hebrew term shasha will often be translated into English simply as to bow, or perhaps as doing obeisance. While in other places, if someone bows towards a god or the god, the same term will be translated as worship. The translators, of course, have the task of contextualizing these words and applying another word that would, in their opinion, send the originally intended message. The same thing happens with other terms that are often translated as worship, such as serve, praise, exalt, etc. Simply put, in Scripture, there is no specific term that is dedicated to an action or devotion that is due to God alone. This is further complicated when one notes that the very word worship, broadly speaking, means to ascribe worth. It is in this sense that judges are referred to as your worship in some courts, or your honor in others. worship, and honor, both essentially referring to the same thing. There is then a difficulty here that must be resolved. If we can give praise to things or people other than God, and we're even commanded to honor creatures, like our fathers and mothers, and we're encouraged to do so even with prostrations and to exalt and ascribe worth to a great number of things, then none of these actions, bowing, praising, honoring, ascribing worth, will in themselves delineate for us the devotion due to God versus the devotion due to creatures. As we will see, context is key, for it is the misuse or misdirection of these actions that is problematic, not the actions themselves. And it is in this way that idolatry is addressed in Scripture. Now, the technicalities. One of the reasons why the Holy Scriptures are filled with references to idolatry is because this sin is paradigmatic. That is to say, that the pattern of this impious custom is seen in a number of other sins. For example, St. Paul will say in Colossians 3:11 that covetousness is idolatry. But covetousness does not necessarily imply carving an effigy and worshipping it. It is instead the pattern of idolatry that St. Paul sees in the sin of envy. So, if we are to understand this pattern, we ought to know what idolatry is in the technical sense. Once this is delineated, it starts to become clear how the Christian veneration and honoring of holy images differs from the pagan practice that we typically denote as idolatry. This distinction finds its standing in this, that Christians revere the image in order to pass honor onto the prototype, the one represented in the image, but the pagans go beyond this and into the realm of manipulation by intending to bring down the spirit of the deity into a suitable physical host. While Christians restrict themselves to approaching the holy images as types, the pagans go further and attempt to turn some of their images into living bodies. It is these bodies that are known as idols. As an example of this, let's take a look at the making of a type of Hindu idol known as murti. The practice of murti puja can be traced to Vedic times when ancient seers created symbols and images of the divinities they revered and wanted to thank. These included the deities presiding over nature, such as Varuna, Indra, Surya, Vayu, and others. With mantras and elaborate rituals, the seers then invoked each deity into the images so that the stone, wooden, clay, or metallic statue will become a murti. What sets apart murtis from other statues or paintings of deities is the invocation ceremony, or Pran Pratishta Vidhi. This is the culminating ceremony in an elaborate set of rituals which begins with various purificatory rites to prepare the images, shrines, and entire mandir for the presence of God. After various other rituals, this concluding ceremony involves invoking each part of the deity into the corresponding part of the image, before finally the pran, life source, is also invoked, transforming the image into a murti with the living presence of the deity. The living presence of the deities in each sacred image means that they are devoutly served like real living persons throughout the day. This begins in the early morning when the deities are gently awakened and continues throughout to when they retire for rest. An important aspect of attending to the deities is the offering of various meals throughout the day called ta. This includes 3 main meals: breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a platter of fresh fruits as well as fresh fruit juice at around 3:30 p.m. So as we can see, these kinds of images, which we refer to as idols, have a different function than the holy images of Christianity. Images are not all of the same kind. It is then not the style or form of the image that makes it an idol, but its purpose and usage. Another example of idolatry can be seen in the ancient Egyptian ritual of the opening of the mouth. This rite reanimated the deceased or animated a statue so that it could eat, breathe, see, hear, and otherwise enjoy everything offered to it. The forked instrument was touched to the mouth of the deceased mummy or statue. It symbolically restored the individual's capability of independent existence. We can see then that idols are essentially man-made bodies meant to house spirits, therefore making them living images. This is problematic in several ways. For one, since this practice was never prescribed by the triune God, engaging in idolatry necessarily implied that they were serving foreign spirits in a foreign cult. Moreover, in this practice, the direction of worship is subverted. Man attempts to bring down the divine and to encapsulate it in a flawed body that must be taken care of. And if someone were to be responsible with this body, the idol, and not put it to rest at the closing of the day, then the spirit of the idol might just have a rough night. Hence, the spirit has a kind of dependent relationship with the worshipper. Of course, this sounds silly to our ears, which brings me to the other reason. The prophets themselves view this practice as extremely superstitious, which is why they will often point out the absurdity of idolatry. For example, the prophet Habakkuk says, "What profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it, a metal image, a teacher of lies? For its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes speechless idols. Woe to him who says to a wooden thing, 'Awake,' to a silent stone, 'Arise.' Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in it." In the same vein, the prophet Jeremiah says, "Their idols are like scarecrows in a cucumber field, and they cannot speak. They have to be carried, for they cannot walk. Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither is it in them to do good." These passages will not make any sense if the idolaters did not expect their images to be truly alive. It is then clear that, just as the previously mentioned murtis, the neighbors of Israel were feeding the images, waking them up, and putting them to sleep, a practice that the prophets described as silly and absurd. If the folly was simply the making of images and the reverence towards the representations of the heavens, then the criticism of the prophets would be out of place. After all, a mere painter would not expect his painting to become alive. Moreover, if the criticism was directed at holy images in general, then the prophets will contradict the sacred tradition itself, since, as we will see, the people of God have always made their own holy images to revere. If the idea of a living image sounds oddly familiar, there's probably a good reason for it. It is in the very first chapters of Genesis that we are provided with the answer to the ancient ceremonial practice of idolatry. By correcting our view of the cosmos and redirecting us away from superstition. It is written, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." In the Hebrew and Greek texts, the term being used for image here is also used to talk about the idols of foreign cults, proving once again that terms must always be contextualized. In this case, Scripture demonstrates the futility of trying to open the mouth of a figure to bring down the deity into it. And how does it do this? Well, by showing us that God Himself created an image, gave breath to it, and made it a living image of Himself, thus giving mankind the purpose of being true living representatives of the deity on earth. Contrary to the problematic vision of the idolater, this sacred purpose is accomplished when we accept the will of God and welcome Him to make home in our hearts. Hence, the only dependence in this relationship is that of the creature to the Creator. It is in this vein that the Gospels say, "Then the King will say to those on His right hand, 'Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer Him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and came to you?' And the King will answer and say to them, 'Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me.'" As we can see, the Lord's brethren are representations of the Lord Himself. The attention that these people received passed on to the Lord Himself, proving again that the attention given to the type passes on to the prototype. This mystery goes even further beyond of what we can comprehend and into the depths of the Trinitarian life. As St. Paul the Apostle says in his letter to the Colossians, "The Son is the image of the invisible God," and the Son Himself tells us in the Gospels that he who has seen Him has seen the Father. In other words, even our attention to God, as direct as we may intend it to be, always has an inherent component of representation. It is iconographic. And the fact that it is iconographic does not make it any less direct. Christ is not one step further from the Father. This is further affirmed in the Gospel of John when it says, "Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent Him. Honor the Son, and you'll honor the Father also by doing so." Father Stephen D. Young, Orthodox Christian priest and biblical scholar, says, "The phrase son of is itself a Hebrew idiom. A son was seen to be the image of his father, and so to be the son of something or someone meant that a person's character reflected that of which they are the son of. So for example, the name of the Apostle Barnabas, or son of encouragement, the references to Judas and the Antichrist as the son of perdition, and Christ's rebuke that those opposing Him were the sons of their father, the devil, because they lie and seek to murder Him. It then becomes clear that the ultimate purpose of mankind, to become sons of God, is an iconographic purpose. And because everything is made by, through, and for the ultimate image, which is Christ, we can see that creation itself is iconographic. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. Therefore, all of our relations are mediated through images. This then means that if we ought to honor anything or anybody, that honor will work itself through image veneration. Keeping this in mind, we can make sense of the iconographic tradition of the Church. We can see that when the nation of Israel was still being formed, the venerable patriarch Moses was called to the top of the holy mountain, a place where heaven could be found, to find himself surrounded by the angelic host in the very face of God, His image. And in this surprising conversation, he was commanded by God to make a tabernacle, the center of ceremonial worship, according to the pattern of heaven as revealed in that very mountaintop. Therefore, the holy tabernacle itself is an icon or image of heaven. This serves as a basis for man-made holy images, which is why the tabernacle itself had images of divine beings and of Edenic flora. Furthermore, according to this same heavenly pattern, the great temple was made. This temple was also completely layered with images of heavenly creatures, including 2 large statues. And from this same pattern, the synagogues are designed, and later the Christian temples as well. Considering the sacredness of these holy centers, the veneration of images naturally follows. It was customary for the people of God to bow towards the tabernacle, towards the temple, and towards the Ark of the Covenant, all of these being exalted by the people and used ceremonially during the history of Israel. It was not surprising then that the Church continued this tradition with an increased fervor, since it was the Incarnation that revealed the full extent of the iconographic life. Furthermore, because Christian images depict holy things and because they are blessed in their liturgical context, they are considered sacred, and, like all sacred things, they are revered. To this day, even modern Jews, who are largely aniconic, make pilgrimage to Jerusalem to kiss the ruins of the Second Temple. Why do they do this? For the same reason that they kiss the Torah scrolls. Because they are considered God-given, and so this act of honor passes to the giver of the gift. A deep appreciation of the Creator is given by the appreciation of His creation. Likewise, Christians kiss the holy images, the holy relics, and more importantly, each other on this very basis. Veneration versus idolatry. Righteous worship is one that flows from the type to the prototype, while idolatrous worship stops at the type and then bounces back into the worship of the self. The pattern of idolatry then consists of a worship where directionality is subverted. For this reason, St. Paul says, "For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because, although they knew God, they did not glorify Him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their own thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible men, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things." The Apostle explains that the invisible God has been made known by created visible things, images. But despite this, the pagans attempted to lower God to the level of a creature, the images themselves. St. Paul further adds that they exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. So, in their attempt to serve themselves by lowering the deity, they served the creature instead. And this is perhaps the key to understanding idolatry. The problem in their pattern was not that they served or venerated creatures, because the people of God did the same, but rather that they served the creature instead of the Creator. In other words, they served the created things in place of the one who made them. Therefore, their service only stayed at the level of the type or image and did not flow in the direction of the prototype. This is not to say that the pagans did not also, in addition to ceremonial idolatry, honor images to reach the ones represented in them, but that even those represented were merely creatures, and that this service was only for the creature's sake. so that even in that instance, the reverence given to those creatures did not pass on to the Creator, because they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. In simple terms, Christian worship is akin to a flow that passes through images and ultimately reaches God, cultivating a relationship in which the created recognizes its dependency on the Creator, while idolatry is a worship that flows only towards the image and back into the self. In this subversive flow, the worshipper and the one worshipped depend on each other. Thus, the creature takes the place of God. This pattern is the reason why St. Paul could say that envy is an idol, and St. Basil warned that we could turn even our own stomach into an idol. In these cases, the created things are served as an end in themselves, and the flow of worship does not reach the Creator. Ironically, this is the very danger in which the iconoclast or aniconic traditions find themselves. If the veneration of images is not rightfully integrated into the worship of the Creator, the worshippers are bound to separate the representations from that which they are meant to represent. This point can be very subtle and easy to miss, but it is crucial. If one is to honor or even to praise a creature without such praise forming part of a continuous flow of worship towards the Creator, one will be committing idolatry. In the Orthodox teaching, we come to understand that God is the only self-subsisting one, which means that all goodness, all life, and all that exists finds not only its source, but its continuous subsistence in Him, so that if anyone is to be recognized as good, as alive, and as existing, it is only by the grace of God. And since we are called by this same God to honor and exalt created goods, we then comply in this appropriate manner. But if we were to believe that a creature is good, alive, or existing by its own subsistence, then we will apply the uncreated attributes to the created. This is why the righteous veneration of creatures and the worship of God are not separated in the Church, since it is in this pious veneration that the Church echoes the psalmist when he says, "Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well." Enter an Orthodox church and you will be surrounded by many images. Apart from the cross, the most abundant will most likely be that of the saints. The veneration of these holy ones is a prime example of the traditional Christian understanding of worship. The worshipper approaches the icon, which is the type of the saint, and in paying honors to the icon, the honor passes on to the prototype, which is the saint. The saint, being made in the likeness of God and conforming to this likeness, serves also as a type of Christ, who is God, and Christ, also being the image of the invisible God, serves as the type of God the Father. The Second Council of Nicaea protected icon veneration because the correct relationship to images, also known as types or representations, is integral to the apostolic faith. Without it, we cannot address the doctrine of the Incarnation in an appropriate way, since it is in the incarnated faith that we worship the uncreated through the created. Incarnation is iconography, and as we've seen, it is the basis of the iconographic world. It is then evident that idolatry and iconoclasm are two extreme errors that lead to a negation of the gospel. For this reason, the veneration of icons in the Church is not only permissible, but imperative. And this is why Nicaea's determination is as forceful as it is. Those who for unfortunate reasons received an incomplete or erroneous gospel should not feel the need to shy away from the iconographic life of the Church, since it is God Himself who will vindicate her by drawing unbelievers to bow down and venerate the saints, His precious images.